In 1902, Salem, Massachusetts, the caretaker of Greywood Cemetery, Elias Finch, was found slumped against the iron gate, his fingernails blackened with soil and a shredded burial ledger clutched to his chest, its final pages violently torn out. Locals said Finch was meticulous, a stooped man in pressed vests who counted each grave twice before sundown. Yet that morning, 4 freshly turned plots lay unmarked near the eastern slope. No stones, no names, no entries in the town registry. Greywood was city-owned, maintained by public funds and church endowments, its records a strict matter of municipal audit. But between 1898 and 1908, gaps appeared, missing dates, unnamed interments, and 6 documented complaints of buried coffins unearthed during routine maintenance. An archived council meeting transcript from February 1903 records heated accusations against excesses of discretion by cemetery staff. Why did every recorded grievance vanish from the clerk's drawer within the month? Respected by Salem's civic board, Greywood Cemetery was seen as a model of Protestant stewardship, with trimmed hedges, quiet avenues, and a discreet scent of lime and peat. But a 1905 maintenance invoice listed 7 gallons of carbolic acid, unaccounted for by any cleaning protocol, followed by a clerk's note, hastily scratched in the margin, "No further questions. Archive closed." The iron gate to Greywood Cemetery let out a long, rusted groan each time it swung shut, a sound that neighbors on Pickering Street claimed they could hear even through closed windows. On quiet mornings, the clang would echo across the frost-bitten stones and melt into the low murmur of the harbor wind. That sound, familiar and oddly comforting, stopped being heard sometime in October of 1902. For nearly 3 weeks, residents on both sides of the cemetery's boundary fence reported no sign of the gate moving. No carts of fresh flowers entered, no gravediggers walked the paths, no funerals passed through. At first, it was assumed that the seasonal lull had come early. Salem's death rate typically slowed in the cooler months, but Mrs. Agatha Wilkins, who lived directly across from the cemetery's west gate, took notes in her diary that would later be presented to the city registrar. October 11th. No workers visible. Gate shut since Tuesday. I smell rotting lime or spoiled milk at dawn. No delivery cart this week. 3 entries later. October 19th. Small figure behind gate at dusk. Did not open. Moved awkwardly. Perhaps Elias, but too short. Elias Finch had served as Greywood's sole caretaker since 1893. His contract, filed with the Department of Public Grounds, confirmed a modest salary, a stipend for tools and responsibility for maintaining all records of burial and maintenance on site. By all official accounts, Finch had been both thorough and precise, but his last signed ledger entry, dated September 28, 1902, detailed the interment of one Samuel Loring, age 71, in plot E12. The burial permit, however, listed Loring's plot as D3, and that spot was already occupied by a headstone bearing the name of a war widow, Abigail Combs. When City Clerk Henry Paxton was asked to verify the inconsistency, he discovered that Greywood's register for the months of September and August had been removed from the vault and replaced with carbon copies, faint, misaligned duplicates that omitted plot numbers altogether. Paxton's formal letter to the Salem Committee on Cemeteries, dated November 3, 1902, raised concern over anomalous duplicate records, missing original entries, and contradictory burial placements within Greywood grounds. The committee acknowledged receipt, but delayed inquiry until spring. In the interim, 2 maintenance workers assigned to the eastern lots, George Tilley and Edward Senn, filed verbal complaints with the Office of Sanitation. According to their sworn statement, on October 25th, they had been instructed to replace a broken drainage pipe beneath the central avenue. While digging, they struck a soft pocket of earth roughly 3 feet below the gravel path. Beneath it was an unlined pine coffin, unregistered, unnamed, and partially collapsed. The remains inside were clothed not in burial garb, but in what appeared to be a gardener's uniform, still marked by municipal buttons. "I know a city coat when I see one," Tilley told the sanitation clerk, "and whoever it was, they weren't laid down proper. No nameplate, no lining, just dumped and pressed under gravel like trash." Sen corroborated the description and added that the soil around the coffin had a sharp chemical sting. Burned my hands even through gloves. Despite the gravity of the report, no action was taken beyond filling the hole and recovering the area with fresh gravel. The workers were told to omit the incident from the maintenance ledger. When Tilly pressed further, his supervisor replied simply, "It's a city matter. You'll not put that in writing again." Greywood Cemetery, unlike most burial grounds in Essex County, had retained a semi-private status after its founding in 1854. Though technically owned by the city, it operated under the joint supervision of the Salem Protestant Charitable Trust, a group with deep financial ties to landholdings along the coast. This meant oversight was split between public office and private committee. That structure had worked smoothly for decades, until 1902, when a sharp drop in committee attendance coincided with the first signs of disorder in the cemetery's registry. Records from the Salem Protestant Charitable Trust, archived at the Phillips Library, show that between July and December of 1902, 5 members abruptly resigned, citing personal distress and conflicts of conscience. In their place, 3 appointees were added, all with no prior record of civic service. Meeting minutes for September 17th note only, new assignments reviewed, request for increased discretion in record-keeping acknowledged, maintenance schedules revised. On the ground, the changes were subtle but cumulative. Gravestones were left uncleaned, grass grew uneven. A pungent smell like scorched leather began to drift from the southern plots on warm afternoons. The smell was strongest near a cluster of elder yews, behind which a portion of the original burial map had been excised and replaced with a newer diagram, drawn in different ink and listing no interments before 1895. By November, parishioners at the nearby Church of St. Matthew began raising concerns during Sunday announcements. Reverend Peter Hall, who had delivered dozens of burial sermons at Greywood over the years, noted the sudden refusal of staff to open the chapel on the grounds. "I knocked 3 times, no answer, lights on. Door locked from inside," he recorded in a private letter dated November 10th. "I smelled ammonia near the vestry window. It lingered on my gloves even after I returned home." The chapel remained closed until December. When it reopened, the pews had been removed and the altar stripped. Officially, it was undergoing repair due to pest damage, but no repair crew was ever recorded entering, and the glass in the main stained window had been removed entirely, with wooden planks hammered in its place from the inside. The atmosphere within the cemetery darkened with each passing week. Even the pigeons that once roosted along the eastern wall abandoned the area. Mrs. Wilkins noted in her diary, "Not a single bird song since mid-November. Wind still howls, but it is a quiet that bites." Then came the letter. On December 14th, 1902, an unsigned envelope was delivered to the Office of Vital Records. Inside was a single page, unlined, with 12 names typed in uneven ink. Of the 12, 6 were confirmed as recently deceased. The other 6 had no death certificates, no burial permits, and no known graves within Essex County. Scribbled at the bottom, "Find them. Begin with E17. That one was still breathing." Elias Finch was last seen publicly on December 9, 1902, emerging from the east gate of Greywood Cemetery at dusk. According to Miss Evelyn Carter, a seamstress who passed him near the Mill Road, he appeared unusually agitated. His coat was soiled and half unbuttoned, she told city investigator James Aldridge the following spring. "He carried a canvas sack tied with twine, and I swear his eyes looked black, not dark, but as though bruised. He didn't look at me. He kept muttering, like counting." 3 days later, when the letter reached the Office of Vital Records, Aldridge was assigned to review the cemetery's irregularities. He was not a detective, but a municipal assessor, usually tasked with property disputes and census audits. Yet his methodical nature and knowledge of local record-keeping made him the city's best option. Aldridge's initial visit to Greywood on December 17th was brief. A snowstorm had recently coated the grounds in a brittle crust. The gate was unlocked but creaked, as though resisting. No one met him. The office building, once Elias Finch's residence and registry centre, stood dark, though a plume of chimney smoke curled above the rooftop. He entered anyway. Inside, the air was thick and sour, layered with the sharp scent of ammonia and something earthier, wet stone and rotted cloth. The curtains had been drawn shut and pinned with nails. Dust coated the desk. A single oil lamp sat unlit beside a stack of ledgers bound with frayed leather string. Aldridge did not disturb them. He moved through the rooms carefully, noting that the bedroom was stripped bare. No bed, no linens, only a chair turned on its side near a soot-stained fireplace. In the corner, an empty bird cage hung from a wire hook. Finch, it was known, kept a thrush named Henry for company. Neither man nor bird was present. The most disturbing feature was in the cellar. Aldridge found the basement door unlatched and descending into blackness. With a matchstick, he illuminated the narrow stairwell. The steps were stone, slick with frost, and led to a shallow chamber lined with wooden shelving. The shelves, originally meant for tools and spare lamp parts, had been repurposed. Small wooden tags were nailed to each beam, labeled not with names, but numbers and dates. Some tags were fresh, others had been scorched or painted over. On the floor lay a crate filled with stained cloth scraps, pieces of gloves, scarves, and buttons, each tagged with a string. He left immediately and returned the following day with a constable, Walter Griggs. Together they documented what they could, sealing the office behind them with city wax. An emergency notice was issued, suspending all burials at Greywood until further inquiry. That evening, Aldridge began cross-referencing burial permits from the past year with entries in the cemetery ledger. Of 76 documented burials, 11 had no matching headstone. 4 more listed names not found in any state death record. 1 permit had been forged entirely. The seal of the registrar was missing, and the form number matched one issued to a different cemetery in Danvers. The names from the anonymous letter, 12 in total, became Aldridge's priority. Over 2 weeks he verified 6 deaths: heart failure, influenza, 2 accidents, and 2 unconfirmed household misfortunes. Their graves were inconsistently marked, some with incorrect dates or oddly generic epitaphs. The other 6 individuals he discovered had all been patients at the now-defunct Essex County Convalescent House, which closed in late 1901 after its funding was reallocated. Most of the patients had no surviving family. Only one, a 39-year-old laundress named Harriet Dean, had ever been recorded as discharged, and that discharge, filed in February 1902, bore Finch's signature in the witness box. City records show no employment for Finch outside of cemetery work. He had no authority to sign for hospital discharges, yet his name appeared 3 more times in the final ledger of the convalescent house, beside notations that read simply, "Released to Greywood." By January 1903, Aldridge submitted his findings to the Salem Committee on Cemeteries. The meeting transcript survives in city archives, a typed document bearing several redacted lines and marginal notes. During the meeting, members of the Protestant Charitable Trust reportedly grew defensive. One member, Mr. Josiah Baird, called the matter a dangerous overreach of municipal interference into sacred grounds. Another stated, "If names are missing, it is due to administrative error or spiritual discretion. Not every soul buried must be marked for the state's satisfaction." Aldridge was instructed to pause his investigation pending further review. He did not. On January 19th, he returned to Greywood at night, accompanied this time by a young stenographer named Clara Newell. They entered the grounds under lantern light, documenting each step. Their destination, plot E17, the location cited in the anonymous letter. The snow had melted slightly, revealing a portion of the earth that appeared disturbed. Sagged in the center, not yet sunken but uneven. No marker stood nearby. When Aldridge drove a metal rod into the ground, it met resistance at just over 2 feet. They returned 2 days later with a permit for exhumation, issued quietly under a sanitation clause. The coffin beneath was plain and dry. The lid came loose with a single pry. Inside was a woman's body, face turned away, dressed in a hospital shift bearing the mark of Essex County. She was not embalmed, yet there were no signs of decay. Her fingers were curled tight against her chest, and her jaw had been bound with twine. No identification was found on or near her. The burial ledger contained no entry for E17. Aldridge documented the body, had it transferred to the county coroner, and made a formal request to exhume 5 more unmarked plots. Before permission could be granted, A fire broke out in the records room of the Vital Records office. It began at dawn on January 27th. The fire department arrived swiftly, but not before a third of the documentation, death records, permit forms, correspondence, was destroyed. The ledger containing Aldridge's list of anomalies was among the items lost. Arson was suspected, but no accelerants were found. A janitor reported smelling turpentine in the stairwell the night before. The building had no gas line. Following the fire, the committee issued a gag order on cemetery investigations, citing community unrest and potential desecration of sacred grounds. Aldridge was reassigned to census duties. Newell was quietly let go. The exhumed body of the unidentified woman was buried in an unmarked grave at Harmony Hill, this time under city supervision. A month later, Mrs. Wilkins noted her final diary entry concerning the cemetery. "There are men in uniform now, not soldiers. They walk the rows every morning. They do not wave. The smell is gone, but so are the pigeons. I haven't seen Finch. Someone else tends the gate, but he does not speak." By early spring, a new caretaker had been appointed. The office was repainted. The cellar shelves were removed. No further complaints were documented. But on a stormy night in March, a box was found outside the back entrance of the Phillips Library. Wrapped in oilcloth and sealed with a button from a municipal gardener's coat, it contained the original burial ledger from Greywood Cemetery, charred around the edges, but still legible. Inside were dozens of entries, some crossed out, others rewritten. One note, dated August 1902, appeared to be scrawled in Elias Finch's hand. It read, "They are not dead, only removed, as instructed." On April 3, 1903, Reverend Thomas Bell of Boston's Northern Episcopalian Mission arrived in Salem unannounced. Tall, deliberate in movement, and known for his work in factory towns with rising suicide rates, Bell had been invited discreetly by a former seminary colleague who now served on the Essex County Charitable Trust. That invitation was not recorded in any official correspondence. What is documented is Bell's private report to the diocesan archive submitted in May, which begins with a single line. "What I saw at Greywood cannot be confessed." Bell stayed at the Whittier boarding house, 2 streets from the cemetery. For the first 3 days he observed from a distance. Witnesses later described him as calm, standing at the edge of the iron fence each morning, holding a worn prayer book in gloved hands. On the 4th day, he entered the grounds without escort. The new caretaker, a silent man with thinning hair known only as Mr. Carver, let him pass without comment. Bell walked the perimeter, stopping often to examine stonework, the pattern of the plots and the soil in shaded areas. When he returned, he appeared shaken. According to Mrs. Melinda Crane, who hosted Bell at the boarding house, he sat in the parlor until past midnight, whispering scripture and writing furiously into his notebook. "He smelled like lye and candle wax," she later testified. "He told me not to speak his name if anyone from the city came by." 2 days after his visit, Bell left Salem. His report, archived but later restricted from public access, included a set of 5 pencil sketches. They depict crude rectangles beneath trees, rows of uneven headstones, and a cellar door propped open with a shovel. In the margins of one drawing he wrote, "No birds, only silence," and a draft that pulls downward. By mid-April, word of Greywood's irregularities reached a young journalist from Boston, Frances Layton. Layton, one of the few women reporting on municipal corruption in New England, had built her reputation investigating the mismanagement of public hospitals. Her first article on Greywood, published April 18th in the Eastern Chronicle, was titled "The Vanishing Dead: Why Salem Forgets Her Graves." The article cited anonymous sources, including former city clerk Henry Paxton, and mentioned the missing ledger pages, Finch's disappearance, and the unmarked graves. She quoted a passage from Reverend Bell's sketches without naming him. "I have walked the path and counted the markers. They lie. There are more buried than are remembered." Public reaction was immediate. Letters poured into the city's editorial office. Within a week, Layton was denied access to Greywood by order of the Salem Committee on Cemeteries, who claimed the article was sensationalist and injurious to civic peace. Her request to interview the new caretaker was ignored. Undeterred, she interviewed 2 stonemasons who had worked near the grounds. One, Charles Denham, confirmed that in late March he was hired to replace a row of grave markers in the southern section, none of which bore original names. "The stones came pre-chiseled," he said. "I didn't do the carving. They gave me dates, just dates, no names. Some dates didn't make sense. 2 stones had the same year, but months in reverse order." Leighton filed a second article, "Stones Without Names," which ran on May 2nd. 2 days later, the Chronicle's office was visited by 3 men claiming to represent the Salem Board of Religious Affairs. They demanded retraction and confiscated Leighton's field notes. Her editor, under pressure from city officials, pulled the next piece before publication. Leighton never wrote about Greywood again. Meanwhile, Aldridge, reassigned but not silent, continued assembling what he called his private index. In a letter to a friend in Concord, dated May 10th, he wrote, "Every time I speak the truth aloud, a page disappears. Yesterday, the map of the 1900 interments was gone from my drawer, locked, no sign of forced entry. I am watched now. They don't hide it." In June, a second body surfaced. A flood caused by a sudden thunderstorm overwhelmed the southern slope of Greywood, exposing the corner of a wooden box near the base of a retaining wall. A child walking along the perimeter path saw it first. Authorities arrived within the hour and removed the coffin before the public could gather. This time the remains were badly decomposed, but again the clothing did not match burial attire. There was no casket lining, no documentation. The area was sealed and the slope reinforced with fresh stone. The city's explanation came swiftly. Erosion due to poor drainage. Relocated remains to be respectfully handled. No further identification was made. No public viewing was permitted. The child who reported the sighting was not interviewed. Her mother, when asked by Francis Leighton in a final correspondence, declined to comment. In July, a conflicting report emerged from inside City Hall itself. Eleanor Massey, a filing clerk in the permits department, claimed that several Greywood burial forms had been falsified after approval. She brought one example, a permit dated May 16th for a man named Ernest M. Rawlins, supposedly interred in plot A7. The date of death was May 13th, but the hospital release form for Rawlins was dated May 18th, 5 days after the supposed burial. His physician's report listed him as still recovering. Massey was dismissed within the week. When asked by a reporter from the Salem Tribune, a city official said only, "She misread the forms. We wish her well." By August, tension in Salem was palpable. Local churches began offering burial services outside city grounds. The Protestant Charitable Trust released a single-sentence statement. Greywood remains a place of dignity and peace. Yet citizens began holding private memorials in their homes, unwilling to visit the site. Attendance at funerals dropped. For the first time in decades, the cemetery's chapel was removed from the city's printed religious calendar. Then, on August 14th, a third anonymous letter arrived. This time it was sent not to an office but to Clara Newell, the former stenographer who had accompanied Aldridge during the initial E17 exhumation. The envelope bore no return address, only the phrase, "For your memory." Inside were 4 photographs, grainy, misaligned, but unmistakably of Greywood Cemetery. Each showed the same view, taken at different times of day, the southern quadrant beneath the elder yews. In the final photograph, a figure appeared, dressed in a caretaker's coat, kneeling beside a fresh grave. No shovel, no headstone, no witness but the camera. Newell, frightened, returned the photos to Aldridge. He placed them with his notes, locked them in a metal box, and filed a final report to the city, a report that has never surfaced in any archive. In the months that followed, burials at Greywood slowed to a halt. No official closure was announced, no statement from the mayor's office, but the gate began to rust again, and the pigeons never returned. September 1903 brought with it a heavy damp that clung to the stones of Greywood Cemetery and seeped through the shoes of anyone foolish enough to walk its overgrown paths. The air smelled metallic by mid-morning, and children who once darted past the fence on errands were now guided to take longer routes through town. No official closure had been declared, but the cemetery had become inert, unattended, quiet, and still visibly rotting from within. Those who dared enter reported strange alterations. Headstones were moved, not destroyed or vandalized, simply shifted, some by inches, others by feet. Names once familiar to residents were swapped with unfamiliar markers bearing dates that did not correspond to any known death registry. And always, behind the trees in the older sections, narrow rectangular depressions marred the grass, unfilled or hastily covered, as if someone had begun digging and lost interest halfway through. On September 14th, a retired naval officer named Captain Ezra Calhoun submitted a sworn affidavit to the Salem Historical Commission. He claimed to have seen two men digging at dusk near the southeast wall. "No lanterns, no tools besides shovels," he wrote. "They dug with purpose. I hailed them twice. They did not answer. I returned the next morning and found the ground undisturbed, but with fresh footprints leading toward the vestry ruins." The vestry, sealed since the previous winter, was now missing an entire wall of paneling. City masons were sent to repair it, but the order was reversed mid-week with no explanation. One mason, John Doyle, later told a reporter from the Tribune that during his preliminary inspection he found burn marks on the inside of the stone threshold and what he described as a nest of tags nailed into the beams, like someone had been keeping score. The Protestant Charitable Trust held an emergency meeting on September 23rd. Attendance was sparse. Minutes of the meeting, preserved in private donation archives, reveal a tense exchange between senior members. At one point, Mrs. Lydia Folkes, the longest-serving trustee, reportedly demanded a full public review of burial records. Her motion was voted down. The chair's only remark on record: "The matter is spiritual, not administrative." Meanwhile, Aldridge began receiving anonymous envelopes once more. 3 arrived in quick succession, each containing single words clipped from newspapers: confess, return, names. The 4th envelope held no note, only a brass key and a torn scrap of a burial permit from 1899. The name was scorched off. The plot number, E3, had been hastily underlined twice in blue pencil. He returned to Greywood alone on September 27th. By then, the cemetery office had been formally boarded up, but the key fit a small hatch on the chapel's north side, an entrance previously concealed by overgrowth. Inside, the floor had been removed. In its place was a shallow pit, neatly lined with blackened brick. No coffin, no remains, just an iron pipe running vertically through the center, hissing faintly with what he described as a heated, bitter-smelling draught. The ledger from his private index includes a line written after this visit: "This is not an accident. It is a system. Someone is doing this and has been for years." In early October, Reverend Bell returned to Salem without announcement. He was not seen in public, but his name appeared on a guest log at the Phillips Library. He requested access to historical maps of Greywood's original layout, especially sections modified between 1895 and 1899. The librarian assisting him, Miss Hester Bly, noted that he asked unusual questions. Was the ground consecrated before or after the first burial? What was done with the excess soil? Was anyone ever buried above ground, even temporarily? The following week, Miss Bly discovered that several of the maps Bell requested had been removed from the archive vault. The vault showed no signs of forced entry. A single note was left behind on the research table: "Records are rearranged the same way bodies are. No error. Only design." The question of design soon became central to the local discourse. A brief but controversial editorial published in the Salem Gazette on October 20th posed the unthinkable. What if Greywood is not mismanaged but repurposed? What if the cemetery, in whole or in part, serves functions not documented in public record? The editorial sparked outrage. It was pulled from circulation within 48 hours. The Gazette issued an apology, but not before copies circulated across Essex County. At this point, attention turned once more to the question of Elias Finch. A rumor surfaced, originating in the basement of the Bureau of Charitable Services. A junior clerk claimed to have seen Finch weeks earlier, entering the basement with a covered wheelbarrow. She noted his gait was irregular, dragging one foot, and his coat was reversed as though worn backward. When approached, the Bureau denied the claim. Yet the next day, an old city wheelbarrow was found behind the rear steps, its wooden handles burned smooth, and its wheels stiff with dried clay. With public pressure mounting, Mayor Silas Grafton announced the formation of an oversight panel on October 31st. The panel was composed of 5 members, 3 from City Hall, 1 from the Protestant Charitable Trust, and 1 from the Board of Health. Their first and only site visit took place on November 3rd, conducted under cloudy skies and amidst a biting wind. Their findings were inconclusive. Officially, they found no evidence of wrongdoing. They acknowledged inconsistencies in record-keeping, but attributed these to periodic staff turnover, document aging, and the tragic disappearance of former caretaker Elias Finch. Their final statement recommended improved oversight, new signage, and restoration of chapel services. But internal correspondence from panel member Dr. Martin Keeley tells a different story. In a letter to a colleague, Keeley wrote, "There is a palpable absence of order. The rows do not align with the maps. The soil turns too easily in some places, and not at all in others. We marked 12 spots for further digging. By morning, 10 were resealed. Someone is anticipating us." 3 days later, Dr. Keeley was found unconscious outside the Greywood perimeter wall. He had suffered blunt trauma to the head and frostbite in both hands. His testimony, given briefly before slipping into delirium, included the phrase, "I followed the pipe, it leads to nothing, but the nothing is full." The panel disbanded the next day. No further site visits were scheduled. In the weeks that followed, citizens who had lost family at Greywood began quietly requesting transfers to other cemeteries. Disinterments, though rare, were approved without contest. In at least 4 instances, coffins arrived empty. It began with the frost heave. In early January 1904, after an unusually mild December, a violent cold front settled over Essex County. The ground cracked open in long, jagged seams along roads and foundations. At Greywood Cemetery, the frozen earth pushed upward through the gravel walkways, lifting stones and splitting pathways. Trees bent under the sudden pressure. One yew near the southern quadrant toppled entirely, its roots torn loose from the brittle ground. The tree fell at dawn. By noon, a labor crew was dispatched by the Office of Public Grounds to clear the trunk and assess damage. What they uncovered beneath the upturned roots was not soil, but structure. A stone platform tiled with square bricks, half covered by tree roots and mud. In the center was a cast-iron hatch, partially rusted but intact, with a recessed handle sealed with pitch. Supervisor Bernard Yule, on site that morning, recorded the incident in his pocket ledger. Surface plate discovered beneath tree, not listed on original cemetery schematics, possibly utility vault. He noted the smell, copper, ash, old linen, and reported the find to the city manager. An inspection team was scheduled within the week. But the hatch was opened that same evening. Under unclear authority, 2 men, one city-employed, one unknown, arrived at Greywood just after dusk and used heated tools to cut the seal. No public record exists of who authorized their access. Neighbors reported seeing flickering light and hearing metallic clanging from the southern quadrant into the night. By morning, the hatch stood open, propped with a crowbar. The labor crew returned the next day to find it so. Within hours, Aldridge received word. He returned to Greywood for the first time in weeks, this time accompanied by Dr. Martin Keeley, now recovered from his injury, but still walking with a cane. Together, they descended into the dark, bringing a lantern and a municipal surveyor's notebook. The shaft was narrow, stone-walled, circular, with a ladder bolted to one side. The descent took 15 feet before it leveled into a corridor, no more than 4 feet wide, carved directly into the bedrock. The walls were smooth, blackened as if exposed to intense heat or smoke. Small iron rings were set into the stone at intervals, and on several hung pieces of frayed cloth or lengths of chain. The corridor led to a chamber, rectangular, 9 by 15 feet, ceiling just high enough to stand beneath. At the far end, a wooden table stood against the wall, its surface scratched and warped. On the table were stacked dozens of paper bundles tied with twine, burial records, city permits, inventory sheets, all with city seals, but each altered, some violently. Names were crossed out, rewritten, or missing entirely. On several sheets the word void had been burned through the paper with the tip of a flame. Beneath the table lay what appeared to be a garment chest. Keely opened it. Inside were the personal effects of Elias Finch: a black vest, collarless shirt, heavy gloves, and a broken eyeglass frame. Beneath the clothing, wrapped in waxed linen, were 5 small cloth pouches. Each contained teeth, human mixed sizes, no jawbones. The teeth were clean, some still bearing traces of gold or ivory fillings. Her slip of paper accompanied each pouch, labeled with a date and a 2-letter code, MLPDHR. Keely stepped away and vomited into the corner of the room. Aldridge, pale and silent, photographed what he could with his folding camera. Then he turned to the final object, a ledger wrapped in oiled canvas thicker than the others. It was Finch's journal or something close to it, entries dated between 1898 and 1902, written in erratic, increasingly disjointed handwriting. Most were mundane: soil measurements, orders for lime, weather notes. But as the entries progressed, they shifted. He began to refer to the graves as shells and the buried as subjects. One entry read, "Subject 34 replaced without notice. Mark not permitted. Order came unsigned. Delivery was breathing. Removal delayed. I logged it E17 but was told to reassign." Another, "Burned the map. The old paths no longer align with the ground. They change overnight. I wake and find the rows have shifted again." The final page was stained with something dark, possibly ink or oil. It read only, "The hatch stays warm even in snow." They emerged after 3 hours, eyes rimmed with ash, clothing streaked in soot. Aldridge made a formal report, filed directly with the mayor's office and copied to the Bureau of Sanitary Control. Dr. Keely submitted samples of the air and dust from the chamber to the city chemist. The results were inconclusive but alarming: traces of benzene, old coal gas, and an unidentifiable alkaline compound present in the soil samples. Aldridge's report disappeared within a week. No trace remains in the city archive. Keely's chemical analysis was retracted by his superior, who cited inconsistent methodology. The original photos taken underground were reportedly lost in a house fire that destroyed Aldridge's residence on February 2nd. The fire was ruled accidental. Still, word leaked. One of the laborers who had cleared the fallen tree, Malcolm Dean, spoke to a reporter from a Worcester paper. Dean claimed to have seen one of the men who opened the hatch, short, hunched, wearing a coat too large for him, dragging something heavy behind. When pressed for more detail, Dean refused. "I saw the man, yes. But what he pulled, no. I'm not saying what it was. I'm not giving it shape. That's how it starts." In early March, the cemetery's eastern boundary collapsed after a cold rain, exposing a sloped trench behind the vestry ruins. Passers-by discovered it the next morning. The trench contained 5 wooden boxes, unmarked and water-damaged. The boxes were nailed shut, but not sealed. A constable forced one open on sight. Inside was a mixture of bones and loose cloth. No full skeleton, no separation by individual remains, just fragments, as if sifted. The constable, identified in records as Jonathan Bell, collapsed shortly afterward from what was described as nausea and neural agitation. He was hospitalized for 3 days and discharged without explanation. The trench was quietly filled with lime and resealed. In response, a group of citizens organized an independent inquiry. Led by retired magistrate Abigail Firth, the group sent a letter to the mayor demanding a full audit of Greywood Cemetery's burial practices. No reply was issued. Within days, Firth's home was vandalized, windows broken, records burned. She relocated to Newburyport and refused to speak publicly again. By April, the city issued its final directive on Greywood. The cemetery would remain closed to new burials indefinitely. The office would be decommissioned, records transferred to the Hall of Civic Memory, groundskeeping limited to basic maintenance. No mention was made of the hatch, or of the teeth, or the journal. On April 11th, the chapel was demolished. No ceremony, no notice. By dusk, only its foundation remained. The foundation of the chapel remained exposed for weeks after its demolition. Grey stone slabs, still etched with soot lines from where the vestry had once stood, formed a crooked outline against the soil. The ground beneath had shifted slightly, as if reluctant to be still. On several mornings in mid-April, a fine mist was seen rising from the foundation at first light, despite the absence of dew. The mist smelled faintly of vinegar and rusted iron. No explanation was offered. Aldridge, increasingly isolated but still driven, returned again to the site under cover of darkness. The hatch beneath the fallen tree had been welded shut by city order, its seams sealed with lead and tar. But he was no longer interested in the chamber. He focused instead on the old drainage maps, which suggested a sub-basement once existed beneath the chapel, later decommissioned and omitted from newer blueprints. He found its entrance by tracing the runoff path behind the eastern slope. Behind a veil of ivy and soil, an arched culvert opened into a sunken passage. The entrance was partially blocked by stone rubble, but Aldridge, with lantern and rope, managed to squeeze through. The air inside was cold and motionless. Dust hung in curtains that stirred only as he passed. He descended into silence, boots tapping on damp stone, the echo growing softer with each step. The passage led to a chamber, not wide but long, with alcoves set at regular intervals. Each alcove housed a niche carved into the wall, and in nearly every niche objects were stored: small boxes, personal effects, hospital tags, hair combs, fragments of scripture. Some were neatly arranged, others were scattered as though dropped in haste. Aldridge counted 18 niches before his lantern caught something different, an alcove whose niche had been forcibly sealed with bricks, then broken open. The bricks lay scattered at its base, and within was a canvas bag, its drawstring knotted with a burial ribbon. Inside were more teeth, this time wrapped in linen embroidered with initials, E.F. Next to the bag, pressed into the dust, was a boot print, not Aldridge's. Smaller, narrow-toed, and left fresh in a damp patch of sediment. The toes pointed away, toward the far end of the chamber. He followed. At the end stood a doorway, wooden, reinforced with rusted bands, set into the stone wall with no visible lock. It gave way under pressure, revealing a room no larger than a root cellar. There was no light but his own. The room contained only one item, a bed frame crudely welded from iron piping, with leather straps bolted to its corners. At its center lay the remnants of a wool blanket, soaked through and hardened into the shape of a curled figure. Pinned to the wall above the frame with rusted nails were burial tags, dozens, each tag marked with a number. Some bore smears of what appeared to be wax or old blood, others were blank. Aldridge turned back and climbed out before his lantern failed. The following day he brought Keely to the culvert. They entered together. When they reached the bed-frame chamber, they found the room had changed. The bed frame was gone. The walls had been whitewashed, the tags removed. No trace of the objects remained. Keely said nothing. He simply turned, climbed back out, and left Salem that night. His resignation from the Board of Health was submitted by telegraph the next morning. In May, a boy collecting scrap iron in the woods behind the cemetery discovered a bundle of metal tubing buried beneath a pile of brush. The tubing matched the frame Aldridge had photographed weeks earlier. Tied around the bundle was a length of leather strap with a brass buckle, engraved faintly with the initials CPH, believed to stand for the convalescent patient house shuttered 3 years prior. The boy's family handed the items to city officials. By the following day, the items were reported lost in transit. With official channels closing, Aldridge resorted to sending private messages to surviving members of the cemetery's original oversight committee. Few responded. One, Lydia Folks, invited him for tea at her family estate near Marblehead. What she shared there was not evidence, but recollection. "My father said the land should never have been used," she told him, eyes fixed on the parlor floor. "He was a city planner. When they surveyed the eastern edge, they found inconsistencies in the water table, shifts in stone density. They said the ground wouldn't settle properly. It moved. He told them. They ignored it. When asked why the site was selected anyway, she paused. Because it was already owned. Because it was quiet. Because no one asked questions about what was already under it. That same week, the city sealed all external entrances to the Greywood grounds, citing structural instability due to weather and aging infrastructure. Warning signs were posted. A new fence was installed. The gate was padlocked. The Protestant Charitable Trust released its final statement on the matter on June 1st. Greywood Cemetery has served its purpose. The grounds shall rest in stillness and dignity. We ask the public to honor this closure. But the public had already turned away. Churches refused to mention the site. Funeral services diverted permanently to Harmony Hill and Cedar Bluff. The name Greywood disappeared from local directories. And within weeks, vegetation overtook the paths. Moss grew thick on the gates. The wind returned to its old howl, and the pigeons did not come back. Aldridge, facing threats and stonewalled correspondence, compiled what he called his final ledger. It was never published but left in a sealed box, deposited with the Phillips Library under his own name. The box, catalogued in July 1904, remains stored in a restricted archive. Its contents have not been released. The last known document referencing Greywood is a single postcard, postmarked October 1904, addressed to Clara Newell. No signature, no return address, just a sentence, typed unevenly and faded by water. They buried what they could not explain. In the winter of 1905, the city of Salem entered a period of bureaucratic silence. No new appointments were made to the Cemetery Oversight Board. The Office of Vital Records issued only minimal statements, each reduced to procedural formality. Internally, departments that once exchanged regular memos regarding the maintenance and administration of Greywood Cemetery ceased all correspondence related to the site, not by directive but by tacit understanding. It was as if the institution had vanished without burial. Mayor Silas Grafton did not seek re-election. His announcement came without ceremony, and no explanation followed. His final act in office was the appointment of a new city archivist, Nathaniel Crane, whose first order was to transfer all existing Greywood records into restricted access, citing archival preservation. When questioned during a town hall meeting in March, Crane answered plainly, "Certain histories are meant to be preserved, not displayed." At the state level, a brief inquiry was launched by the Massachusetts Board of Public Cemeteries. The inquiry consisted of 2 written interviews and 1 unannounced site visit in May, during which the investigators were unable to access the grounds due to the reinforced fencing and posted municipal warning signs. Their report, filed in June 1905, concluded that further investigation into the activities at Greywood Cemetery is unwarranted at this time due to lack of surviving personnel and adequate documentation. No charges were ever filed. The official story, as it settled in public memory, framed the events as an unfortunate product of mismanagement. A caretaker with failing health, incomplete records, a failed drainage system. One city report, drafted hastily and signed by a deputy clerk unfamiliar with the case, stated, "There is no reason to believe that the irregularities at Greywood signify malice or misconduct. But for those who lived near the gates or had family interred within, the matter was not so easily closed. Families quietly requested the relocation of remains. Most requests were denied on the grounds of safety and access. Of those granted, nearly half the exhumed plots were found empty or containing unidentifiable remains. These incidents were not documented publicly. Instead, small notes were added to family files with phrases such as site compromised or reinterment inconclusive. Funeral homes operating in Salem adjusted their practices. Ministers avoided any mention of Greywood in sermons. New training materials for undertakers removed all references to the cemetery. It became, in practical terms, an erased place, present only on maps, marked with thin outlines and the word defunct. Children whispered about it in alleys, but few dared approach. The Protestant Charitable Trust dissolved in 1907, its final report consisting of 4 pages of general budget summaries and 1 closing line: "Our work is complete. We leave stewardship to the earth." The Trust's assets were quietly absorbed by an unnamed foundation in Boston. Its remaining board members relocated or passed away without public notice. Aldridge retired from public service in 1906. He declined all interviews and was last seen in the Phillips Library in early 1908, reading a ledger by candlelight long after the library had officially closed. The custodian who found him asleep at the table said Aldridge was holding a copy of the original 1895 Greywood plot map, which had vanished the next morning. Dr. Martin Keeley disappeared from the public record entirely. His resignation from the Board of Health was never officially acknowledged, and his name was removed from the city physician's registry by mid-1905. Though rumor circulated that he had taken a position in a sanatorium in Maine, but no records support this. Clara Newell, contacted years later by a local reporter, refused to comment on anything beyond the first exhumation. She had married, moved to Vermont, and raised a family. But in her attic, sealed in a tin box, was a single photograph, the third in the sequence received anonymously in 1903. It showed the figure kneeling beside the unmarked grave. A magnifying glass reveals, just barely, the cuff of the coat sleeve. It bears a tag stitched with the initials EF. No monument marks the site today. The iron gate still stands, though rusted and overgrown. The warning signs have faded. The gravel paths are choked with weeds, and the soil has settled unevenly, forming unnatural ridges across the southern quadrant. Every few years, a university historian or local archivist attempts to revisit the records. Most give up. A few claim their copies are missing. Others discover that entire boxes have been mislabeled or contain irrelevant files, shipping receipts, agricultural surveys, records for entirely different towns. In 1911, a man named Arthur Bray, visiting from Lowell, reported seeing a fire inside the fenced grounds. He claimed the light came from below ground, flickering through a gap in the earth where the chapel once stood. He told his hotel manager. No action was taken. 3 months later, Bray was found drowned in the North River. The official investigation noted no signs of struggle. His pockets were empty save for one item, a small scrap of cloth embroidered with the words, "Registrar's Copy." As the years passed, the cemetery's name faded from municipal conversation. New developments rose on the west side of town. A park was proposed in the adjoining woods, but was never approved. Construction teams cited geological instability. Surveyors complained of magnetic interference and frequent mapping errors. No one could agree on where exactly Greywood began or ended. In the spring of 1915, a schoolteacher named Alice Gamble found a piece of paper wedged in the stone wall behind the vestry ruins. It was damp, folded into quarters, and bore no date. Written in uneven ink was a short message. "Names are not proof. Ask who paid for silence." By the end of 1915, Greywood Cemetery was no longer mentioned in public record, yet its silence remained an open wound beneath the surface of Salem. Land surveys skirted its boundary, real estate appraisers declined to assign value to adjacent parcels, and local property deeds began including the phrase, "excluding former burial ground" in fine print. No one challenged the language. It had become, through usage and avoidance, an accepted truth. Those who remembered spoke quietly. Mrs. Agatha Wilkins, once a vigilant neighbor and diary keeper, passed away in 1914. Her final entries never made it into public archives. They were found in a small wooden box by her niece, stored beneath loose floorboards. The last dated page read, "No matter how long I watch, no matter how many names I learn, the earth always forgets. The ground will take the rest." Her papers were never submitted to the city. Her niece burned them in a kitchen stove, citing family preservation. That same year, a private investigator named Roscoe Heller visited Salem on behalf of a client seeking to verify an ancestor's burial at Greywood. Heller, methodical and skeptical by reputation, accessed municipal records, spoke with long-retired officials, and attempted to match land use records with burial permits. His notes, later found among his personal effects, described the effort as an exercise in missing pieces. Heller's final correspondence to his client was brief. "The cemetery exists only in the absences. Where there should be names, there are gaps. Where there should be earth, there is hesitation. I advise no further pursuit." The client did not respond. In November 1915, the final parcel adjacent to Greywood changed ownership. The buyer was a Boston-based textile investor who never visited the site. The land remained undeveloped. When asked in a later interview why the parcel had been acquired but left untouched, a company spokesman replied, "Some places are best left as buffers. No one wants to build over a ledger that doesn't close. Students at Salem's Teacher Training College, curious about the local law, sometimes wandered toward the site. Those who trespassed came back with photographs too overexposed to print or negatives that developed into smudges. One student, Margaret Fell, brought home a torn fragment of stone marked only with the letter E. Her roommate reported that she stopped sleeping through the night after that. Fell transferred to a college in New York the following year and never returned. By 1916, even maps began omitting the name. New editions labeled the area as Municipal Woodland or Undeclared Public Lot. Older residents continued to refer to it as Greywood, but rarely aloud. It was now a place that had once been a place, erased not by act of violence, but through an orchestrated stillness. No court ruling, no official closure, just a collective decision not to remember. Yet traces remained. In the archive of the Phillips Library, one index card contains a handwritten note, filed without author. It is not catalogued under subject or date, only tucked between pages of the 1902 municipal budget. The card reads, "A man once said he buried them with care, but care is not the same as truth." In 1918, following a fire at the Harmony Hill burial vaults, a temporary relocation site was proposed on the northeast corner of Salem. Greywood was briefly considered, then dismissed without debate. The committee minutes simply state, "Area not viable." Previously exhausted. No further details were given. Some say that the legacy of Greywood lies not in the missing records, but in the architecture of Salem itself. Certain alleys curve where no road plan demands it. Drainage grates bear mismatched serial numbers. In some homes built between 1910 and 1913, crawl spaces are deeper than the foundations allow. These are minor irregularities, yet they persist. Silent, inexplicable, and ignored. What cannot be ignored is the weight. Visitors to the area often describe an indistinct pressure in the air, not fear exactly, but reluctance, as if each step closer draws something forth, not from below, but from memory, not a haunting, but a recognition. The city has long since moved on. New deaths found new resting places. Institutions changed names, then vanished. The people who once fought for answers faded into unrelated obituaries. But in the heart of that forested space between stone and root, time has not quite continued. There are no more photographs. There are no more names. There is only the open question. If Greywood Cemetery was not a place for burial, then what was buried there at all? If this story moved you, if you made it to the end, it's because you also feel that these hidden truths must come to light. Let us know in the comments which city you're watching from. That way we'll know how far these stories reach. And subscribe to the channel. There are many other cases the world tried to forget, but we insist on remembering them. This story was reconstructed from documents that were found. All names have been changed to protect the source.